the more prepared and the more effectively we respond to backlash, the stronger our movements are. And so this information is intended to help us organize smarter. It's not intended to in any way limit our activity. So it's been our experience that when we're prepared and when we're well organized, that we can respond to backlash in ways that strengthen us. So joining me on the panel today is Cheryl Davila. She has for 9 years served as a Berkeley Human Welfare Commissioner. And she is going to tell you a story of her removal a week ago with the introduction of a resolution in support of Palestine. Yeah, Cheryl absolutely deserves our and I think 4 days ago we organized for her to be here, so she is incredibly powerful and strong activist. Lada Kislani, who is the director of the Arab Resource and Organizing Center. Many of you may have heard of one of the more successful campaigns of BDS has been organized by Lada and the Arab Resource and Organizing Center, among others, called Walk the Boat. Catherine Hamuda, who is an Atlanta resident and who organized a campaign called Gilly Campaign that was about challenging a contract facilitated by the University of Georgia for police collaboration between the Israeli military and local police. And then Max Geller, my comrade at the International Jewish Anti-Zionist Network, and Max and I worked for about 1.5 years on a report called The Business of Backlash that we have copies of here today, but that really outlines and details all of the information on these donors and on the organization of this network and its tactics. So, let's see, this would be a great time for the PowerPoint. So, short of having the PowerPoint, I'm just gonna keep going here. When we say backlash, what we mean is a concerted campaign to stop any and all criticism of Israel and to do so by any means necessary. That means eradicating any support of the Palestinian struggle and movement work that can be used against Israel, meaning any movement work who by its nature is anti-racist, anti-apartheid, in support of communities that are most impacted by policing, racism, repression. All of those are understood as a threat to Israel because they correctly have assessed that the strength of one of our movements for justice is a strength to another movement for justice. So as we'll demonstrate, they do a lot of work to undermine not only the Palestinian struggle, but they have a long history of undermining the South African struggle, Black Liberation Movement, United Farm Workers, etc. So they use military surveillance, economic, political, and legal means, not to mention slander. I mean, there's really, as many of us know, not really any bounds to what they will use to achieve this goal, and they take the strategies as far as they're able to get away with. And that's where our work in building a popular campaign is so important, because it is public consciousness and the public will that determines what they can get away with. So we are going to offer some examples about the ways in which popular organizing has helped us not only defend, but in defending helped us build and strengthen our work towards justice, but also the way that we do our work for justice makes us more or less vulnerable to backlash because we are more or less successful in bringing in a broader part of the movement that we're working with and that we're also in support of. So what is the business of backlash? There's an elite group of donors, and we've pointed to about 11 of the major ones that run their money through family, public, and community foundations. They do these in ways that often you could almost almost call it money laundering. They hide it through what they call quote-unquote donor-advised funds, which means that the public, it's not only that the public doesn't know, it also means that for tax purposes, on the 990s of these community, these donor-advised funds, you don't see the money coming in. You see the money going out, but you don't see the money coming in the same way. So these donors, why do they fund Backlash? Some of them are ideological Zionists, both Christian and Jewish, but half of them actually have really no history or clear interest in Zionism per se. What all of them share in common is that they are profiting from the role that Israel plays in the region in relationship to the United States in terms of access not only to resources and oil, but also to perpetual war and the arms trade, and also the destruction and then the contracting of the reconstruction of countries and governments. So all of these donors, which Max will share with you, are invested in and literally profit from the colonization of Palestine, US-Israel wars and occupation in the region. They also are invested not only in oil, they've made a lot of money on oil, but they're also invested in quote-unquote alternative energy sources, which are not really alternative. They're not oil, but they don't do anything to stop us from permanently destroying this planet. So, so their interest in this is both in ideologically challenging the kinds of justice and the changes in society that we're fighting for, but they're also literal profit. They collaborate with and have the backing of the US and Israeli government. So when we're talking Backlash, we're talking a network of donors who are funding, who are running fundings through a network of foundations, who are then funding a network of organizations and media propaganda groups. And all of that has the backing of the US government and the Israeli government. So the number one targets of this repression in terms of the Palestinian movement are Arab and Palestinian activists who play a very central role, obviously, in the Palestinian struggle, not just here, but internationally. But of course, those same mechanisms of repression got their hold in the targeting of Black communities, and the targeting of immigrant communities, and the targeting of queer and transgender communities. So the news we all know is that they share an interest in attacking all of our movements. The good news is that means that it's not just on principle that we're committed to joint struggle against multiple forms of injustice. It also means that practically we are literally fighting the same enemies. And so the more that we are able to really recognize that and understand that we can, our demands, our campaigns, our work has to take into consideration how do these demands also support and at least not undermine these other movements for justice that are central to our collective victories. Okay, so this part's pretty hard to do without the PowerPoint.
Does anyone have
a Mac adapter?
That would be so great if we could crowdsource this.
Mac to VGA adapter. I emailed like every other panelist in the conference. So
does anybody have a flash drive?
I have a flash drive.
Put export yours
onto a flash drive. And does someone have an idea?
And then all we need is another
PC.
Yeah, or
also good. Good. I'll try and solve it.
Keep going.
Okay, we can do this.
Okay. So, how many people have heard of the Ruit Institute? The Ruit Institute.
How do you spell it?
Good question.
Good question. But the power R-E-U-T. So, can someone, Barbara, can you tell us what the Root Institute is? No? Okay. Can anyone tell us what the Root Institute is? Yes, please.
It's an Israeli strategic think tank. It's kind of like the Rand Corporation of Israel.
Right. So it's an Israeli strategic think tank that plays a very central role in advising the Israeli military and government on its strategy and tactics. And about 10 years ago now, immediately following the call for boycott, divest, and sanctions from Palestinian civil society, the Root Institute released a report called the Delegitimization Challenge. And what they were saying is, we need to attack those activists that are questioning the quote-unquote legitimacy of an Israeli state, and we need to separate them from the activists who recognize the legitimacy of a Jewish state on Palestine, but challenge it. So many of us gladly accept the title, the Delegitimization Network, because in fact we do think that it is not legitimate to have a Jewish, exclusive Jewish supremacist state on Palestinian land. So what this report concluded is, whereas once the greatest existential threat to Israel was military, meaning resistance, which is hard to call military given the lack of access to a military that Palestine has, but and that Israel is facing a, thank you. Okay, I know how much you'd like me reading to you, but now you can read it yourself.
No, I found it for you.
Is this one? Thank you. Oh, I don't even have it on my screen. Is there something that has to be, do you know how these things work? So basically what the report sums up is that whereas once the challenge was military, it is now basically a PR threat. And that the, oh, you want us to use them? Got it. That whereas once the threat was military, now what Israel is facing is a massive PR threat. And that it is now fighting a battle on two fronts. It continues, of course, to repress and target Palestinians, both in historic Palestine, what is now called Israel, and the occupied territories, its neighbors, Palestinians in diaspora, but then also it needs to turn its attention to activists who are organizing on the BDS, on boycott, divestments, and sanctions, and who, quote unquote, challenge the legitimacy of a Jewish exclusive state in Palestine. And what it calls for is a series of strategies to then undermine what it calls this this delegitimization network. And it calls for using the tools of surveillance and the strategies of surveillance that is developed to repress Palestinians, and that it is sold. No,
more, right? You go ahead.
Okay. So that it should take that apparatus of surveillance and use it to investigate, surveil, and ultimately target activists working in what they call hubs of activity. And so these hubs are places of recognized Palestine solidarity activity. It includes Paris, it includes London, it includes the Bay Area, it includes different states, other parts of the United States. And that within those hubs, it specifically wants to target what they call catalysts. People whose creativity, activity, and political will are drivers of campaigns and organizing in solidarity with Palestine. So what it says that it needs to do is create its own network of catalysts and hubs to challenge our network of catalysts and hubs, because traditionally what it's done is it's always done very elitist organizing, and it's always gone to influential decision makers behind the scenes and used money and political influence to achieve its goals. And what it recognized, and it used South Africa as its case in point, that grassroots organizing and boycott, divest, and sanctions has taken down other superpowers. And they need to find a different strategy to try to challenge the grassroots organizing. And they tried to learn lessons from South Africa, but they also borrowed a lot of lessons from South Africa, including spying. So basically, the network of Backlash is their well-resourced, well-organized network of organizations, propaganda machines, funders, donors that are partnering with the Israeli state. Initially, there was a $6 million, very cynical $6 million investment by Zionist organizations, the Jewish Public Council Affairs, and the Jewish Federation funded $6 million. Now, there's $300 million. Thank you. There's a power cord. It needs that. It's charged. Okay. And now there is $300 million being put into this network. $200 million of that is from private donors, largely in the United States, and $100 million of it is from the State of Israel. So the opposition we're up against is significant, but despite how resourced, well-organized they are with a very, very precise division of labor, they haven't been able to stop us. And in fact, the boycott, divest, and sanctions movement has grown in strength and numbers. And that is almost 100% through ours and others, labor and political will. So, yes, that is the good news. And so now what, now what we're so that's how I perfected my reading out loud. So what we're going to do is first hear from Max and offer you some details on who, when you stand up, and all of a sudden there's 8 articles about how anti-Semitic you are and what a horrible person you are. There are specific people who are funded to write those articles about you and your work. And so,
I think we should maybe hear from
Really?
Shoot. We should maybe do the Berkeley Commission first, because that might not be as
so what Max is going to do is just lay out very briefly who are these major donors, what is the network of organizations they're funding, and what are the propaganda machines, so that we can all start to point to this this is not the grassroots. It gives the appearance, because it runs through these intermediaries like the Jewish Community Foundation, quote, also known as the Zionist Community Foundation. It runs its money through that, so it appears to be the Jewish grassroots, when in fact, it is the 1% who is giving the vast majority of money to this activity, which is not to say that there is not, certainly popular Jewish support for Israel, but there is also growing criticism of Jewish people against Israel. And more than anything, they want to give the image that it has massive support from the Jewish community. So I'm going to turn it over to Max, and I'm going to get this PowerPoint out.
Good morning. So, without these slides, I'm just going to start with an anecdote. And when I was at Northeastern University, I was a member of the SJP, and we did a walkout of an event that my campus hosted with Israeli soldiers. And as everybody in this room knows, a walkout is a tried and true method of nonviolent protest. And the school freaked out, as schools are wont to do, and disciplined us for this protected act of speech. And so we did the sort of normal things that SJPs do in this country. We wrote op-eds. I played the identity card. I said, as a Jewish law student, I am outraged that such a misuse of anti-Semitism would be allowed to stand by the school. And for a while, everything calmed down. But 2 weeks after this event, the first article by a group called Camera, which is the, you know that one? Wrote a nasty article about us and me in particular. And then over the next, so over the next 2 months, over 40 articles about the same event, the same one event, this walkout, were written about us. And they were the same sort of article, and the same recycled press releases appeared on the websites and in the pages of over 30 different internet publications. And the sort of my first response to this was like, whoa, what happened? How did this happen? We were a very small walkout involving 11 students. And we generated 40 articles about how terrible we were. And it's at first glance you think, oh man, I really have run into a grassroots buzzsaw here. What's happened? And until we sort of went through the process of writing this report and researching who these groups were who were attacking us, it really does seem like there is a strong pro-Israel movement. But what we found was that all of these organizations have one thing in common, and that thing is who's funding them. So what we're seeing is not grassroots effort for a pro-Israel grassroots movement at all, but rather an astroturf one. And it's a very effective strategy. Great. I'm so glad we don't have to talk about this next part because it's so much text and it's really going to be helpful for you to read along with me. Can I pull this for a minute?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Is there a website where we can get?
Yes, there is. Up here are little executive summaries of all this information, and on the back is the website. So you're welcome to come get them at the end. All of it's available for download.
So of all those 40 groups who attacked me, and if we can sort of imagine, I'm sure, who were the ones doing the attacks, but they all had at least two of these donors in common. And a lot of you will know some of these names. I mean, as you can imagine, Sheldon Adelson is up here. but we were,
I'm so sorry.
oh, it's fine.
Physical accompaniment.
Yeah. I think seeing the Koch brothers up here, and I want to impress upon you what a relief it is that the people who are funding Zionist backlash are also funding all the other terrible things in this country. You know, it's a real relief, right? Because if they were funding great things in this country, we would start to question ourselves maybe. But to my unending relief, the same Koch brothers who are smashing unions in Wisconsin are also funding the Committee for Accuracy in Middle Eastern Reporting. You know, they're funding CAMRA, they're funding the David Project, and they're funding the Right to Work states, and they're funding fracking. I mean, we are, it's refreshing to see, to have this sort of crystallize for us that, say again?
I say they're bad to the bone.
Right, and we're on I'm here to remind everybody that we're the good guys. But we also have some of the richest and oldest money in America. The Schusterman Family Foundation, which is most famous for funding Hillels, has been a big oil company in this country for 200 years. And can I get the next slide?
Definitely.
The Fairbrook Foundation, which is made up by which is the richest family in Oregon, have been have literally spent all of their money on Zionist causes. The Bradley Foundation, which has, I mean, we're just talking about like an insane amount of money, but that money comes from their Monsanto interest. They're heavily invested in what was it, the Iron Dome, and so you have people like Seth Klarman and Lyndon Harry Bradley who are shilling constantly, and Seth Klarman, as you might know, owns the Times of Israel. And what you saw during the last Gaza massacre was that the Times of Israel was talking repeatedly about how great Iron Dome was. And then Raytheon, which is a major, which Seth Klarman and Bradley have major stock in, got the contract to run Iron Dome in the midst of this war. So you can almost see the return on their investment happening before your eyes. And while they're invested in Iron Dome and the propaganda around it, they're also invested in slandering SJP students. They're also invested in funding the JCRC, which we'll hear about in a second. They give their money, all of those groups that you just saw give money to these, what we call intermediaries. And so these intermediaries, which also have multi-million-dollar annual budgets that all come from the same 11 people, then get shuffled out into major, like almost 100 active Zionist groups. And here are some of them. This is not an exhaustive list, but this is a sort of, I mean, how many people in this room have had interactions with at least one of these people? Yeah, so you know what I'm talking about. They're terrible, right? So, I think it's important to understand that, like, when we talk about the ADL or when we talk about Aisha Torah, who is not only behind the Canary mission, which is an attempt at isolating some of those catalysts that we were talking about, they also funded the massive campaign to get the Third Jihad DVD in the hands of every swing voter in Ohio and in Florida on the eve of the 2008 election. They have their hands everywhere. And that turns into this sort of propaganda machine. They have a media empire. All of these seemingly sound conspiratorial. This is like a factual. This is like it's not. We're not talking about a large conspiracy here. We're talking about a very small one, but one that has far enough reach to touch us all. I mean, we all heard from Razmia Oge last night. Can I get the next one? Razmia, you can draw a direct line from these funders' money, because one of the groups they fund is called the Lawfare Project. And the Lawfare Project boasts about how they provided documents from the Israeli government to the American prosecution in Razmia Ode's case. So this, in addition to making like the lives of SJP students difficult, it goes, and I think this is sort of underscores Sarah's initial point, that as the Reut Institute called for, we're talking about the very sharp end of the Israeli military state. When we rise to the point of incarcerating Palestinian American grassroots organizers, this backlash can both be sort of like nasty articles about SJPs, but it can raise the very top level of backlash.
So we're going to very quickly go through the tactics because we want to get to the case studies where really the most concrete learnings and information are. Just quickly in terms of joint struggle, so the Fairbrooks Foundation that Max mentioned spends almost all of their money on Zionist backlash, but they also spend a lot of money attacking gay liberation. They single-handedly funded in Colorado a drive to an initiative, a ballot initiative to register gay people as sex offenders are registered in the state of Colorado. We're talking about like really off people. And then they fund things like how enraging to them the endangered species list is. And you see these websites and they're just outraged that we are calling these animals endangered species. So it's really the extreme right. So everybody in this room, I am sure, is familiar with the misuse of anti-Semitism as a tactic. I don't need to spend a lot of time here, but the one thing I really want to lift up is the last point, which is, and I think it's really important for us as activists, the less we engage in defending ourselves against anti-Semitism, the more time we have to actually challenge their racism. And so while the irony of lifting up anti-Semitism for the purposes of claiming racism in defense of their racism against Muslim and Arab communities is something that we just need to call. And instead of spending so much energy defending ourselves, we should be talking about anti-Muslim, anti-Arab racism, which is at the core of really the attack on Palestine. Islamophobia. Over to you.
I will talk about Islamophobia. So, the other thing is, in order to sustain this campaign, this concerted effort to repress organizing and activism around Palestine, they have to feed into this war on terror, the othering of a particular person in order to demonize and criminalize them. So one of the ways they do that is through Islamophobia. And they fund a lot of the same organizations and people that put up racist bus ads around the country. Many of you have probably seen the racist bus ads that criminalize Palestinians or Muslims. The same people who fund those ads are the people that are also in this report, right? And they also make it very easy and to create informants. So part of, we talked about COINTELPRO yesterday in our workshop. We have to see this within a larger context. This isn't just about Palestine. This isn't just about targeting Arabs and Muslims. This isn't just about profit, and it isn't just about Israel. It's actually about repressing and disrupting movements, and in order to do so, They create situations where there are informants. They make it possible. They fund the agencies that create these informants. They create agencies that actually create think tanks to think about ways and create strategies in order to develop a context where it's almost impossible for us to do our work without being suspicious of one another, without being scared of the state, without organizing in a way where we can be unapologetic and clear about our politics.
Okay, campus censorship. You talked a little bit about that. Want to talk about the DOE?
Sure. One of these, one thing that the glut of resources has afforded Zionists is a unbelievable access to government offices, which I don't think is that hard to wrap your head around in this country, right? That has sort of been my experience my whole life, that money opens doors. But the kind of doors it opens for Zionists are, and this goes back to the sort of misuse of what anti-Semitism and the misuse of anti-Semitism, what the cost is. And so the Zionist Organization of America has been, or had for a few years, issued complaints to the Department of Education Office of Civil Rights. Now, this Office of Civil Rights exists to deal with real racism, right? And one of the costs of Zionism on all of us is that we lose the opportunity to talk about real racism and instead have to talk about Zionist students' feelings when confronted with pro-Palestinian organizing on campus. So at Northeastern, we had SJP students had their dorms stormed by Babylonian University stormtroopers who were trained in Israel and went to trainings not only in Israel but also in Boston by the Boston ADL on how to spot a hate crime. And so when they heard about a mock eviction notice, they thought, oh, we have a hate crime on our hand because the ADL told us so. And that, so things led to things, and we had SJP students being visited by the police. And that is just a small example of a sort of countrywide problem where we see the defamation and slander against faculty and students made possible by the resources and what those resources allow.
So many people in this room are familiar with, and many legal activists in this room have been helping us fight, what is in some ways a newer tactic of the Israeli backlash machine. And so again, number one targets are always those most impacted, and in this case Palestinians. So material support laws are being used against activists such as Resmia and but also the language of terrorism is being used against SJP students, is being used against faculty. Some people may have heard of Professor Rabab Al-Duhadi, who took a delegation to Palestine, and because she met with leaders of the resistance struggle, both who were Islamic and who were part of left Palestinian political parties, she was accused of, and the language they were using was material support of terrorism, and they were trying to encourage the FBI to do an investigation in addition to the investigation that she had to go under through the administration and also through California legislators. So there are many forms of lawfare. There's actually another workshop on this, but some of what we need to be looking out for, and many of us are, and the U.S. campaign is working on, is anti-BDS legislation, and the crux of that, once again, is the misuse of the gains that were won by the civil rights movement. It's an attack on the civil rights movement, because what it does is it takes the protections that were put in place for the civil rights movement and uses them against the movements that are attacking civil rights. So what the Zionist movement is trying to do is redefine anti-Semitism as certain criticisms of Israel, which goes back to the delegitimization report, those criticisms that question the idea of a colonial state in Palestine, and that will be the basis for discrimination that then tries to legislate that certain forms of BDS are illegal, or that BDS in its entirety is illegal. So that's the legislation we have to look for. Again, they haven't won. And so we're trying to figure out ways to use legislation offensively, not just defensively, and create precedents against some of these cases, spying and surveillance. So, okay. So how many people have heard of the Anti-Defamation League spy case? Okay. So the Anti-Defamation League, whose mission is supposedly to challenge anti-Semitism, which in this day and age, it's not that there are not anti-Semitic attitudes, but there is not a state apparatus attacking Jewish people. There isn't an actual oppression happening. And so the Anti-Defamation League, in fact, spends most of its time arranging for police in the United States to be trained by the Israeli military and spying on our movement. So they were found and charged in the 1990s for spying on over 1,000 social justice organizations. They hired as their spy someone who was working for the South African apartheid government to spy on the South African apartheid anti-apartheid movement, and it shared all of the information that it researched on Black, South African anti-apartheid, farm workers, Madre, anti-sexist organizations, queer organizations with the State of Israel, with South Africa, and with the US government. Again, a collaboration between private Zionist organization and 3 repressive governments. And then there's many other examples. Just to quickly note that students are actually funded on campus to write articles, to spy on their fellow students. Faculty are part of networks that are there specifically to report on their fellow faculty. And so that's where it kind of takes on this McCarthyism type of surveillance, though there is a difference between that coming from a state senator and that coming from private Zionist organizations. Again, when you have the weight of the US government behind it, then you see some of the similarities. Police training and collaborations.
So a lot of you have probably heard about the collaboration between the State of Israel and local law enforcement. And it's important to contextualize that within this report, with this information, because it doesn't just happen as a result of Israel having great tactic that the United States wants to learn from. It is also a very profitable industry, and that's part of why you see collaborations taking place all over the country. So since 2003, ADL has trained almost over 700 law enforcement agencies in this country. And that includes everyone from Atlanta to California to Florida. There probably isn't a state in this country that hasn't had the hands of Israeli training. And as a result, it's people of color, of course, that are most impacted by that. There's also 10,500 law enforcement officers that have been trained, per year. And as we know, for us in the Bay Area, something that we've been familiar with for several years now is the San Francisco Police Department and Oakland Police Department travel to Israel to get trained and also receive training when Israel comes to the Bay Area. And that's part of why we are very active in the Stop Urban Shields campaign. And as you all have probably heard by now, the police also train the Ferguson police, so IDF, the Israeli Defense Force. It's not just about militarizing police. Literally, the military is training police forces in this country. So we're going to move into the Gili campaign and hand it over to Catherine.
Hi, everybody. So I wanted to give a little bit of context about why we chose Gili before moving on into the backlash that our campaign received. But in 2006, there was a murder of a 92-year-old Black grandmother in a Northwest Atlanta neighborhood in English Avenue. The members of the Atlanta Police Department bashed in her front door while she was watching TV one evening. And after expelling 39 bullets into her body, they handcuffed her and left a dime bag of marijuana on her body and left her without any medical attention to die. Then this all is going to make sense, but I think it's very important for you to know that. And then in 2009, there was a raid on a gay bar here in Atlanta called the Eagle. What these two cases have in common is the unit. There's a unit of the Atlanta Police Department called the Red Dog Unit that was created to attack what they said drug dealers in the city. And we came to find out that this unit, members of this unit, were part of an exchange called the Gilley Exchange Program, which stands for the Georgia International Law Enforcement Exchange, by which members of police chiefs, really, across the country go to Israel to be trained in anti-drug enforcement tactics. And then or Israeli members are trained in that, and the U.S. police are trained in counterterrorism tactics. And this is housed at Georgia State University, which is here in Atlanta, in downtown Atlanta, which has a very strong police presence, a history of police brutality. So when we chose Gilley as a target, all of this was really important. Yes, we know that there are many exchange programs. Gilley is not the only, the one in Israel is not the only one, but for us, the relationship between U.S. and Israel was really important. It was important about how police are treating Black and brown communities in Atlanta and in our state. So we chose this as a target, and there's a lot in it, but one form of, you can go in. So in 2011, some of this lawfare that we were talking about, there was House Bill 261 was introduced. So we were trying to find out more information about the police that were going over in this exchange. So we were, submitted a lot of open records requests. We have a Zionist Attorney General who ran, his campaign was on open government and strengthening Georgia's sunshine laws. So I'll just put that out there. And so we had many requests about who these police officers were, when they were going, and there was also a community-based organization that was also trying to find out about these police officers, so we were working in tandem. And I work at the legislature, and one day there was a very quick intro of this bill that would exempt certain records from public scrutiny, and I didn't bring the whole bill, but essentially it was a direct result of our campaign, and so it passed very quickly, but restricted any information about specific members of law enforcement, restricted any information that we could gather about what this program was, the materials that they were given, and it passed unanimously. And that was in 2011. We launched the campaign in 2010. Another form, so when we got into the heart of it, there was an article that you'll see the headline, state info requested by students could link to terrorists. So part of our campaign, we worked with the Progressive Student Alliance at Georgia State University. They were the faces of the campaign at the university, really working to galvanize students, faculty, and staff, and to isolate this program. I know I'm going all over the place. I should say that Gilley is not a department of the university, it's a program that's housed at the university. So there have been faculty and staff for an incredibly long time that have been pissed about the amount of resources that this program takes that actually doesn't benefit anybody at the university, and so we were really able to use that. So, so this article, this TV thing came out targeting, on its surface, targeting the students But as you'll see, this student organization is being used by a terrorist organization. They didn't name us. They didn't name the movement to end Israeli apartheid Georgia, which is a part of the organization that I was a part of. And so it, not surprisingly, it caused some people to shake, especially the students who were like, oh my gosh, I could be kicked out of school. I won't be able to finish my degree. They're calling us terrorists. We have to stop this. And it caused a lot of problems. But really, they were targeting Mia G, and I think it was very strategic on their part to not name our organization. And what it did was we were visited by Homeland Security. So our meeting space, we used to meet at the American Friends Service Committee, and they were visited by the unit of the police department that houses Homeland Security, and they were trying to find out, they already knew who we were, but wanted to find out specifically names of people that were reserving the meeting space. And so I say all of that, and then the national context was that at the same time, there were many grand jury indictments targeting Palestine Solidarity activists, particularly in Minnesota and Illinois. And so that combination was really a perfect storm. I should say that also this was the only article that came out calling us terrorists. And unfortunately, we learned a lot from this about, I'll move into lessons learned, sorry, I'm taking up time. But, we moved, and that was enough to derail us. And I think some of the lessons learned, and I'm not saying this to scare anybody, but I think it's very real. We all know during this work that repression and backlash are a part of it. We think that in theory, we know it could happen, but we didn't do the necessary work at the front end when this happened, that we were able to keep going and keep strong. And some of the lessons for that is that we moved very quickly. We had the context of the murder of Katherine Johnson. We had the raid on the gay bar here in Atlanta, and we had this target, this Zionist man who has his own project at Georgia State. We're like, we're ready to go. We only, we'll gather some information, and instead of taking years or a year or two to launch this campaign, we launched it in 6 months. It was too fast, and we didn't have in retrospect, we had very surface level relationships built, where we didn't do the deep enough organizing in communities that are in Atlanta, the Black and Brown communities targeted by the police. It was very surface. And I think that's one thing looking forward is to take the time to build and to really organize. I mean, that's at the heart of what this is, so that when stuff hits the fan, you can keep moving. Also, our campaign was the first of its kind, and in the national BDS context here, we were the first campaign, divestment campaign targeting this exchange program, and there was hesitancy at the national level to do this. So I think that we're sort of pat on the backs, go ahead and do this, but when it actually came to support, we didn't have it. And I'll
And also, we're going to go till about 11:10, so people who want to stay during the break, because we got started late, so now we're going to hear.
So in the Bay Area, our favorite Zionist partner is called the Jewish Community Relations Council. And anyone who's done work on Palestine in the Bay Area, anyone who's issued a solidarity statement or done a workshop or has tried to organize an event has been targeted by the Jewish Community Relations Council. So some of the case studies that we'll be going through, and I'll try to run through these quickly, but just to give you a sense of, it's not just like organizations that are specifically about Palestine that are the ones targeted. It's mostly actually people of color-led organizations and community-based organizations that are targeted. And that's the case in the Bay Area and all over the country. So JCRC has targeted in the Bay Area San Francisco Women Against Rape. Because San Francisco Women Against Rape after 9/11 stood in solidarity with the Palestinian people, drew connections between state violence here and in Palestine, and issued a position on Zionism, being anti-Zionist, they froze their funding. As we talked about earlier, one of the tactics is economic coercion. As an organization working on services for women in San Francisco, they received city money. And as JCRC was able to put pressure on the city to freeze services for women attempted to get services because of rape and sexual violence for 9 months. You're talking about a huge organization in the city that was not able to get its funds simply because it took a position in support of Palestine and against state violence of Israel. And that's one example. Then we have HOMI. HOMI is an organization, a youth-led organization in the Mission in San Francisco, predominantly Latino. And they, at the time, were interested in doing work around drawing on connections between Black and Brown solidarity, Palestine solidarity, a lot of what's been talked about at this conference. And one way they decided to do so was to have a mural in the Mission District that drew on those connections. So they had various different depictions and illustrations of struggles around the world. And one of those things was Palestine. And as you can see, this is sort of different images or parts of the mural that now is up in the Mission District. Because they also received a grant, given NGOization and nonprofits and CBOs, a lot of our community organizations get money from the city to do some of this work, get money from foundations. And the Arts Commission in San Francisco funded this mural project. As a result, JCRC got wind of this, got wind of the sort of the objective of building solidarity with Palestinians, and put pressure on the city to stop HOMI from producing this mural as they had planned. If you go to the next slide. So this is what the mural now looks like. They were able to fight it. They decided not to back down. They wanted to include something on Palestine. But the original image actually had the shape of Palestine. And the original image had that woman at the very bottom with the keffiyeh, with her face wrapped and only her eyes showing. And what they had to do was make some compromise, and what they attempted to do is maintain the integrity of the mural, maintain the integrity of the messaging with solidarity of Palestine, but they had to make some shifts and changes in order to continue to get the funding to complete this mural. So we considered that a win because they stood steadfast and maintained their solidarity. However, as a result of these attacks, HOMI no longer receives funding, no longer has staff, and doesn't exist in the same way in San Francisco. Another case study, if you move back a few, is Eastside Arts Alliance. Eastside Arts Alliance is in East Oakland, and they do amazing work in Oakland, community empowerment, self-determination. They're very rooted in the idea of liberation and build across different communities. After Oscar Grant was murdered, they asked for Palestinian or Arab youth to come to a workshop with their youth on drawing on connections between Oscar Grant's killing, occupation of Oakland by police and military, to Gaza and Palestine. So they had this workshop, a very successful training and exchange between Black and Brown youth about the connections of state violence. And as a result, JCRC targeted Eastside Arts Alliance. And what they tried to do is, what they actually did do, is they targeted a particular foundation, the Haas Foundation, which many of you may be familiar with. And the Haas Foundation is quite Zionist. And the Haas Foundation used to fund Eastside Arts Alliance until this workshop happened. And they put pressure on Eastside Arts Alliance to take a position, to speak out, to condemn the workshop, to condemn Palestine solidarity. And because of their principled position, because of how principled their work is, and how deeply rooted they are in the community, they refused to do so. They refused to do so, they lost the funding, and they were actually able to get funding from other alternative sources as a result. Another example is Middle East Children's Alliance. They held a art exhibit of have many of you heard about the Middle East Children's Alliance Children's Art Exhibit in Oakland? So they brought art from children in Gaza to Oakland at the Children's Art Museum and attempted to have that displayed for a period of time, to have educators come view it, activists, community members, and JCRC targeted them. So what they did is they forced MOCA, the Children's Museum, not to display the artwork. But as a result, Mecca gained a lot of support because of grassroots organizing. We held demonstrations, we put out a lot of media messaging, and we made it a point to say that this is not only outrageous, but unacceptable. So what we did is Mecca did a tour of this children's art museum all around the country at other museums and actually gained more attention and gained more support for Palestinians in Gaza. So I'm going to move into AROC now. That's the organization I work with, and some of you may have heard of it. Many people are familiar with AROC's work around Block the Boat, boycott, divestment, sanctions, our work on repression and militarization, and its connection to the State of Israel. But we are a service, advocacy, and organizing organization, so we also try and attempt to really build power in the Bay Area in the Arab community. And one way we do so is by addressing the needs of our community members. Years ago, our youth arm, AO, the Arab Youth Organization, identified education equity as an area that they wanted to work on and published a youth-led research report with some recommendations, one of which was having more representation in schools, including having Arabic language taught. And a few years later, our parents, some of the member leaders decided that they wanted to advocate for more language access. And for the last year, since last December, we've been organizing with Teachers for Social Justice in San Francisco, along with a few Board of Education members and the Vietnamese Youth Development Center, along with our members, in order to advocate for Arabic language pathways and Vietnamese language pathways within San Francisco Unified School District. This is something they have for many other languages: Chinese, Japanese, Latin, Hebrew. They have many languages offered in San Francisco Unified School District. Arabic and Vietnamese were two that weren't, and the two populations that actually are growing, and two languages that would serve a pretty big group of students and families. So we advocated for this, we organized, and by May, we mobilized, and you can see in these pictures, dozens of Arab families, dozens of Vietnamese families, youth, activists, who spoke at the Board of Education hearing to support this idea of having Vietnamese and Arabic language pathways, and it passed unanimously. The Board of Education supported it, they were very excited about it, and so were our families, as you can see in these photos. Weeks later, we find out that JCRC also targeted us. So what they decided to do was meet with Board of Education members behind closed doors and attempt to depict AROC as a hate group. What they focused on was the fact that we do work on Palestine, and specifically that we're anti-Zionist. Now, they did not even use the word anti-Semitic. I think it's an important distinction to make at this conference, at this time, but the way AROC was targeted with the Board of Education and with the City of San Francisco, publicly in mainstream media in San Francisco, on the front page of the Examiner, calling us anti-Semitic, calling us anti-Zionist, calling us a hate group, was because we are clearly anti-racist. We take positions against all forms of racism, including Zionism, and that's why we were targeted. They attempted very hard to put up the resolution for a revote, and this is unprecedented. Never in the history of San Francisco has a resolution been passed unanimously, listing community partners on the resolution, as they always do. So AROC and VYDC, the Vietnamese Youth Development Center, are listed on this resolution as community partners to help implement and design these programs in order to really root these programs in the community. And that's what JCRC was targeting. They were saying, we're all about Arabic language. We love and support Arab people. We want to support Arabic language. We want to support Vietnamese people and Vietnamese language. Our issue is AROC, and they're a hate group, and therefore the city should not have any relationship to the Arab Resource and Organizing Center. Now, what that meant for us as an organization that actually provides legal services and language access services, as well as organizing in the city, that jeopardized our city funding, it jeopardized our city relationships, and the networks that we're a part of, because we do all our work in coalition and in networks, and we receive all our funding in coalition and in networks. So it not only made AROC vulnerable, it made all the CBOs, the community-based organizations that partner with us and do work with us and strengthen all our work together as a result, also vulnerable by these attacks. So we organized throughout the summer in order to make sure that they could not move this forward. Our goal was not just the Arabic language pathway. Our goal was to make sure that the integrity of the resolution was maintained, the integrity of the organizing that went behind it was maintained, and that our communities were not made invisible in the process. We created a defense committee throughout the summer. We met on a regular basis. We put out alternative media pieces to really speak to who AROC really is, what the work really is, and what does it mean to stand against Zionism, because that's what we were really targeted for. And as a result, we moved many of the board members, and we brought out people. We had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of letters that were sent to the board members in support of AROC, from very prominent people to local activists to teachers. We mobilized Jewish allies and teachers and educators to speak at the Board of Education meeting to talk about how problematic it is that an organization like JCRC attempts to guise itself as a Jewish community organization when in fact it's an arm of state violence. And as a result, we actually were able to move forward with the resolution as is. AROC is still listed as a community partner. The superintendent in the city has stood by us. But what that also means is that we're continuing to face attacks. We're still quite vulnerable. We've already seen how they've met with really prominent organizations that we work with. They've met with a very prominent church that actually is one of the most prominent churches in the Bay Area in order to put pressure on them, to put pressure on the board and the city not to work with AROC. And in fact, was successful in having this church issue a statement against AROC and calling us a hate group. Only after meeting with us as Arab leaders in the organization did they then rescind their letter, and they realized that what they were up against was actually the state of Israel. That's who they were meeting with when JCRC sat with them at the table. And when they sat with us, what they were with is a community organization rooted in justice and against racism, the same principles that this church stood for. So they rescinded the letter and said, no, we support AROC, in fact, and we take back the letter that we had issued originally, which confused the board members, as you can imagine. But this is what we are up against. This is a concerted effort that all of us are going to face, but particularly people of color. It cannot be, really stressed enough that the folks at the receiving end of this repression are going to be people of color. And it's a responsibility on everyone's shoulders to make sure that you create the environment that really defends and supports them and doesn't shy away from the most difficult of circumstances so that we can be stronger together.
So we're now going to hear from Cheryl. We've heard about both sort of the highest levels of government and media, as well as Zionist and local government backlash, and we're going to hear from Cheryl on a very, very local effort and the work she is doing to get Palestine recognized.
Hi, so my story is I've lived in Berkeley since 1981. In 2009, I became a commission member of the Human Welfare Community Action Commission in the city of Berkeley. It's an appointed position by Councilman Darrell Moore. And I've been serving on that since 2009. And after hearing about the bombardment in Gaza and feeling very sad and appalled by all the actions, I, last September, requested in our meeting to have that added to our agenda to discuss. And so it got added in October and has been on the agenda ever since. And it took a while for people to come to the meeting and talk about Palestine, and we were in a funding cycle. So in May, NECA and some other organizations came and spoke to our commission. The commission kept it on the agenda until this September. In June, more people came. In September, over the summer, we wrote a resolution to divest in the Israeli occupation, and it was all moving forward for the meeting on the 16th of this month. So on Monday, before that meeting on the 14th, Darrell Moore's aide called my house, and then Darrell Moore called my house twice. And so my husband calls me and says, these people are calling you, and I said, don't give him my cell phone number, but he didn't. And then I contacted Darrell Moore, contacted me the 15th and stated if I did not withdraw the resolution, I would be removed from the commission. So on the 16th, the room was filled with all supporters of the resolution. There were 3 Zionists in the room, one of which was on the commission. I walked into the room and was told that I had been terminated from the positions because of refusing to withdraw well, actually, they didn't even give me a reason. They just said I was terminated, and I therefore wasn't able to sit with the commission at that meeting. I was not able to vote. They did let me participate a little bit, but it didn't pass the resolution, but the resolution is still on the table. The commission was not, none of the commissioners apparently were told prior to the event of the meeting, but I know there were phone calls made at that meeting. There were 4 council members that showed up. Usually our meeting never has a public comment, never has any other people besides our commissioners there. And so I now know what it feels like. And it's not, it's you know, I'm happy that I'm the voice for Palestine in Berkeley right now, so. And I'm hoping to move the resolution forward. They're talking about revisions, taking out the oppressive states. Well, Berkeley has a oppressive business policy, oppressive states business policy, and we were trying to add Palestine to the listed areas of that. They're trying to talk about taking that out and making revisions to the resolution, but hopefully they won't get away with what they're trying to get away with, and we'll be able to move it forward. So that's my plan, to get back on the commission in a non-appointed seat, in a poverty seat in my district, and move it forward.
So over at the photo station, there are signs that say "I stand with Cheryl," and so we ask you to take a selfie, right, and tweet it or Instagram or whatever you do with those things. Take a picture and get them up so we can show them to Councilman Moore. But I think going back to what Laura said, it is so important when Cheryl and other people step up that we are right there. And we're not just there for the defense of Palestine, we are there to defend Cheryl and her position, because Cheryl has served for 9 years. And in addition to fighting for Palestine, she is fighting for people without resources across her district and across Berkeley, and we are all part of that fight and need to be part of that fight. So just really quickly in closing, we wanted to just say once again that despite this attack, we've had many wins.
We've had many wins, and this, conference has highlighted so many of them, and there's a lot of organizing on the ground that's made that possible. And, we can list them here. They're on the slides: Block the Vote, the UAW vote, Urban Shield, the UC divestment campaigns, and different university campaigns all over the country. Many of you have all been a part of that, including, attempts by legislation to be passed and that haven't been able to be passed, like the Department of Education rejecting Title V. Is that 5? 6, yeah. I don't know these numbers. And in the university environment, exposure to such robust and disordinate expressions, even when personally offensive and hurtful, is a circumstance that a reasonable student in higher education may experience. In this context, the events that the complainants described do not constitute actionable harassment. So these are wins, that these things have been rejected, but also there's still much more work to be done. One thing that we talked about, we heard from Rasmia yesterday. We heard her speak to you all about the necessity to continue to support the liberation of Palestine. And the other necessity in this is for everyone who cares about Palestine work in the United States, who considers themselves part of the solidarity movement, to make sure you take up cases of repression as part of that. Because there is not one without the other. Every single person who works on the case of Palestine or issues of Palestine is vulnerable to repression, particularly immigrants, women, and people of color, and Rasmiya is the epitome of that. So it's a responsibility of everyone in this room, everyone at this conference, to go back to your communities and make sure that when we start her appeal in court in October, and that when the real organizing on the ground happens, that everyone knows about her case, and we make it as difficult as possible for the state to win this one. We make it as difficult as possible for Israel to win this one, and we fight for our leaders and our freedom fighters, because they are the ones who are really at the receiving end of this repression.
And the exact same policies and the exact same laws and the exact same strategies that were used against Rasmiya are starting to be used against those who are organizing for Black Lives Matter, including domestic terrorism. And we are just as responsible to fight for people who are fighting in those struggles. So just in closing, Backlash should not limit our organizing, but we want to know what we're up against so that we organize stronger and smarter. Legal defense is important, but legal defense can't do anything without a popular campaign. Angela Davis said, "I would never have gotten out of jail if there had not been a movement to fight for me. I had the best lawyer I could have had, and without a movement, I couldn't have gotten out." And popular mass-based organizing of those who are most impacted not only are the strongest basis for justice, they also protect all of us against repression. We have to grow ourselves through connecting with the other movements. Quickly, please take a picture in support of Cheryl. If you sign up on the list, we can send you links to download everything. There are cards up here on anti-Semitism, it's not anti-racism. Take them, we can send them to you. You can print them as posters or flyers. We also have copies of the executive summary and of the book. The executive summaries you're welcome to take. The books are $15 to $20 for printing. But please, please do sign up. And the other thing I just wanted to make a call for is that organizations like AROC are very rare in the United States. They combine fierce, uncompromising organizing against state violence of Israel and the United States, and they provide a huge service to their community while building the power of Arab communities in the Bay, but also nationally. And so we're also going to ask people to support AROC and become monthly supporters of AROC. And so if you sign up, we'll also send you a link because the work they do is incredible and you should know about it. So thank you so much. A hand to all of us on the panel.